Hello again, and good morning from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Normally, at this time, I should have been given a private online lesson. Unfortunately, my student had another appointment, so I will post parts of this lesson, what should have been here on YouTube. And I'll start with the Freedom House reports on the Advanced Placement Comparative Government and Politics courses PDF files, 6 official course countries. Since I have a shortened course to begin with, it only started in late October and it will end in early February 2021. We largely have to focus, my private student and I, on these 6 countries. And they include China, Iran, Russia, Nigeria, Britain, and Mexico. And then these countries have the following political systems and governmental systems. China is a unitary, in practice unitary, even though it does have so-called autonomous or self-governing cities and regions. Practically a one-party state, despite the fact that it does have several other registered political parties, but they are not genuine opposition parties because they never can criticize nor attack nor run against the ruling Chinese Communist Party. So it's effectively a totalitarian communist dictatorship. And a presidential one because the current president, Mr. Xi Jinping, has basically monopolized the political and governmental power. Despite the fact that there is a vice president, there is a prime minister, and there are other government officials, President Xi Jinping is effectively the autocrat of China. Much like, although President Xi's dictatorship is by no means as brutal as that of the late Mao Zedong, and probably it's even less brutal than that of the late Deng Xiaoping. Nevertheless, he's a totalitarian dictator. Iran is a semi-theocratic, presidential, and authoritarian dictatorship where there are actually 2 heads of state. The supreme leader of Iranian Muslims, who is elected by a group of fellow high-ranking Muslim clerics for an 8-year term and who is not term limited. And then there is the elected president who serves 2 4-year terms, probably a maximum of 2 4-year terms. Then Russia is theoretically, nominally, a democratic, federal, semi-presidential republic. In practice, it is an authoritarian, dictatorial, rather unitary or only partly and asymmetrically federal presidential republic, where the president is not term limited. The current incumbent, Mr. Vladimir Putin, can serve until 2036 if he lives so long and if he still wants to keep governing Russia so long. And then we have Nigeria, which is a democratic, federal, and presidential republic. Yeah, in Russia, the president is elected for 6 years. In Nigeria, the president and vice president are simultaneously elected for 4 years. Then we have Britain, which is officially a unitary, democratic, parliamentary, and constitutional monarchy. In practice, it has given a fairly wide degree of self-government to 3 of its regions. They have elected regional parliaments, and they have appointed governments which are responsible to their regional parliaments or legislatures: Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. The Queen's or King's role is purely ceremonial, traditional, and symbolic one. He or she, since 1952, she, meaning Queen Elizabeth II, does not have any independent political power. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet exercise the executive power, but they are responsible to the Parliament, more specifically to the Parliament's lower house, the House of Commons. The House of Lords has mainly an advisory role. Contrary to the directly elected House of Commons, it can only delay and change laws, not kill them. And finally, we have Mexico, which is a democratic federal and presidential republic. The president is elected directly by the Mexican voters for a single 6-year term. Like in most other presidential republics, there is not even theoretically a prime minister or head of government apart from the president, nor is there a vice president. Mexico has a bicameral or two-house directly elected Congress or federal legislature, whose two houses, the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies or Cámara de Diputados in Spanish, and Senate or Senado in Spanish, are both elected directly, and both use parallel electoral systems. In the Chamber of Deputies, elections which are held every 3 years, 300 of the 500 deputies are elected by the first past the post system. In other words, there are 300 single-member districts throughout Mexico, and whoever gets the largest number of votes in those electoral districts wins those seats. There is no second round. The remainder 200 seats are based on proportional representation, and in order to qualify for the proportional seats, the parties and electoral alliances only need to get 2% or more of the proportional vote. By contrast, out of the 128 senators who are elected every 6 years, in the same years as the presidents are elected, half of the seats, or 64, are based on first past the post system. Then 32 are based on the runner-up system. Mexico has 32 federal states, including the capital, Ciudad de Mexico, or Mexico City. And in the runner-up system, the second most popular party or electoral alliance gets 1 seat in each of the 32 federal states. The remaining 32 senators are elected by proportional representation, and the vote threshold is once again low, 3% for the parties and electoral alliances. No wonder both houses of the Mexican Congress have several political parties. So let's deal with Mexico. This is a summary of the Freedom House's annual report for 2019. Out of a possible total of 100 points, Mexico scored 62. Political rights, 27 out of 40. Civil liberties, 35 out of 60. In 2018, Mexico's score had been 63. Mexico has been an electoral democracy, or I would qualify that statement, fully an electoral democracy since 2000. So why was this year chosen? Because that year, the longtime Mexican ruling party, it had had 2 other names as well, the originally left-wing and socialist, but gradually centrist and technocratic, and in favor of basically free market economy. The Institutional Revolutionary Party finally lost its hold on the presidency. However, I read in a Mexican history that already in the 1980s, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or PRI, had started to lose gubernatorial elections in some or several Mexican states. In 1994, apparently in a free and fair presidential election, its candidate Ernesto Cedillo Ponce de Leon received under 50% of the vote, while in the probably rigged 1988 presidential elections, its candidate Carlos Salinas de Gortari had received just over 50% of the vote. However, the Democratic Revolutionary Party's candidate Cuauhtemoc Cardenas had probably correctly charged the PRI with vote fraud. So in 2000, Vicente Fox, the presidential candidate of the center-right National Action Party, Partido de Acción Nacional, was able to win. Already in 1997, the PRI had lost its majority in the lower house of Mexican Congress, the Chamber of Deputies, and actually since 1997, no party has had an overwhelming majority in either the Chamber of Deputies or the Senate. In 2006, in a possibly or in an allegedly rigged election that was very close, decided by only I think 0.5% or something like that, the Institutional Revolutionary Party's presidential candidate, sorry, I'm going to have to take a sneak peek of Wikipedia. Wikipedia article on the 2006 Mexican general election. So according to the official and largely disputed results, Felipe Calderón, the candidate of the National Action Party, got 35.9% of the vote, while ironically the current Mexican president, the left-wing Party of the Democratic Revolution, Mr. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, got 35.3% of the vote, while the former ruling party, Institutional Revolutionary Party's candidate Roberto Madrazo, only got 22.3% of the vote. In 2012, the former ruling party PRI was able to capture the presidency, with Enrique Peña Nieto being elected with 38.2% of the vote. Andrés Manuel López Obrador came second with 31.6% of the vote, and the the National Action Party's candidate Josefina Vasquez came third with 25.4% of the vote. In 2018, on his third try for the presidency, at last, Mr. Andrés Manuel López Obrador was able to win. His new party is called the National Regeneration Movement, or in Spanish, El Movimiento por la Regeneración Nacional. It's a social democratic, therefore left-wing party. He got 53.2% of the vote. The National Action Party's presidential candidate Ricardo Anaya only got 22.3% of the vote. The Institutional Revolutionary Party's candidate José Antonio Meade only got 16.4% of the vote, and the independent candidate Jaime Rodríguez Calderón received 5.2% of the vote. So already in the presidential election since 2000, there has been a healthy alternation of power. Currently, Morena, or the National Regeneration Movement, holds a majority in both houses of the Mexican Congress, partly because of party shifts. Originally, it only got a majority, I believe, in the Mexican Chamber of Deputies, while it got a plurality in the Senate, but because of those party shifts, at least one party has merged with another one, one of the minor parties. Now it has a majority in both houses of Congress. However, the midterm elections are looming already in July 2021, and it is, well, given the fact that Mexico's economy is suffering a lot from the COVID-19 virus, it is conceivable that Morena might lose its majority, or at least might lose seats in the lower house of Mexican Congress, the Chamber of Deputies. In the gubernatorial elections of Mexico, uh, the votes are competitive, and also at the local level in the mayoral elections. Let's take a look at the federal states of Mexico. Aguas calientes, or warm waters. It's located in north central Mexico. Its governor is Martin Orozco, affiliated with the National Action Party. Then next on the list, which is based on the alphabetical order, Baja California, or Lower California. So you guessed it, it's located to the south of the US state of California. So therefore in northwestern Mexico. The governor is Mr. Jaime Bonilla of the National Regeneration Movement. Then Baja California Sur, southern Lower California. Its governor is Carlos Mendoza Davis of the National Action Party. So it's also located in northwestern Mexico. Then the state of Campeche, which is in southeastern Mexico. Its governor is, or acting governor is, Carlos Miguel Aiza Gonzalez of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Also in southeastern Mexico is the state of Chiapas. Whose governor is Mr. Rutilio Cruz Escandon Cadenas, affiliated with the National Regeneration Movement. Then Mexico City, also one of the federal states or entities nowadays. Its mayor is Ms. Claudia Scheinbaum, a member of the National Regeneration Movement. Then the state of Chihuahua, one of the so-called toy dog breeds, is named after this state, I assume. Is located in northern Mexico, For northwestern Mexico, it borders the US states of New Mexico and Texas to the north, by the way. Its governor is Mr. Javier Corral Jurado of the National Action Party. Then the state of Coahuila is located in northern Mexico or northeastern Mexico. It borders the state of Texas along the course of the Rio Grande River. To the north, its governor is Mr. Miguel Riquelme Sofia, a member of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Then the state of Colima in western Mexico on the Pacific coast of the country. Its governor is Mr. Jose Ignacio Peralta Sanchez, a member of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Then the state of Durango, which is located in northwestern Mexico. Its governor is Mr. Jose Rosas Aispuro, a member of the National Action Party. Next on this list is the state of Guanajuato in central Mexico, whose governor is Mr. Diego Sinue Rodriguez Vallejo, a member of the National Action Party. The state of Guerrero, which is found in western Mexico, or southwestern Mexico more specifically, its governor is Mr. Hector Astudillo Flores of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Then the state of Hidalgo is found in northeastern Mexico, or eastern Mexico more specifically. Its governor is Mr. Omar Fayad of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Then we have the state of Jalisco in western Mexico. Its governor is Mr. Enrique Alfaro Ramirez, who seems to be an independent currently. Yeah, he used to be affiliated with the citizen movement, Movimiento Ciudadano, but decided then, once in office, to be an independent governor, claiming that he was never an active member of the citizens movement. Next, we have the state of Mexico, not to be confused with the Ciudad de Mexico, or the country's capital. It's located in south central Mexico. Its governor, Mr. Alfredo del Maza, belongs to the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Then we have the state of Michoacan, which is located in western Mexico on the Pacific coast of the country, whose governor is Mr. Silvano Aureoles Conejo, of the party, or he's affiliated with the Party of the Democratic Revolution. In the state of Morelos, which is located in south central Mexico, the governor is Mr. Cuauhtemoc Blanco of the National Regeneration Movement. In the state of Nayarit, which is located in western Mexico on the Pacific coast, the governor is Mr. Antonio Echevarria Garcia of the National Action Party. In the state of Nuevo León, which is located in northeastern Mexico, it has a 15-kilometer stretch of the US-Mexican border, and it shares that border with the US state of Texas. The governor there is Mr. Jaime Rodriguez Calderon, who is an independent. In the state of Oaxaca, which is located in southwestern Mexico, the governor is Mr. Alejandro Mural Hinojosa, a member of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In the state of Puebla, which is also located in southeastern, or actually is in east central Mexico, sorry, the governor is Mr. Miguel Barbosa Huerta of the National Regeneration Movement. In the state of Querétaro, which is in north central Mexico, the governor is Mr. Francisco Dominguez Servien of the National Action Party. In the state of Quintana Roo, which is located in southeastern Mexico, more specifically on the eastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula, so on the North Atlantic coast of the country, the governor is Mr. Carlos Joaquin Gonzalez of the Party of the Democratic Revolution. Then in the state of San Luis Potosí, in north central Mexico, the governor is Mr. Juan Manuel Carreras Lopez of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In the state of Sinaloa, which is in northwestern Mexico on the country's Pacific coast, the governor is Mr. Quirino Ordaz Coppel of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In the state of Sonora, which is in northwestern Mexico on the US-Mexican border of Arizona and slightly New Mexico, the governor is Ms. Claudia Pavlovich of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In the state of Tabasco, probably that hot sauce and Texan and Mexican food is named after this state, I would imagine. It's located in southeastern Mexico, and its governor is Mr. Adan Augusto Lopez Hernandez of the National Regeneration Movement. Then the state of Tamaulipas, located in northeastern Mexico, bordering the state of Texas to the north. And northwest even. The governor is Mr. Francisco Garcia Cabeza de Vaca of the National Action Party. Tlaxcala. There are different ways to pronounce it, Tlaxcala or Tlaxcala being the most common ones, which is in east central Mexico. The governor is Mr. Marco Mena of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which is located in eastern Mexico, with a long coastline on the Gulf of Mexico, therefore the North Atlantic Ocean. The governor is Mr. Cuitlahuac Garcia Jimenez, affiliated with the National Regeneration Movement. In the state of Yucatan, which is in southeastern Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula, the governor is Mr. Mauricio Vila Dosal of the National Action Party. And finally, in the state of Zacatecas, which is located in north central Mexico, the governor is Mr. Alejandro Tello Cristerna. So you can see that none of the country's main political parties, neither the former ruling party, the now centrist Institutional Revolutionary Party, nor the current ruling party, the Social Democratic and therefore leftist National Regeneration Movement, nor the National Action Party, which is a center-right party, dominates the government at the state level. So all of these three parties, main political parties, have a significant number of governors at the state level, but none of them has a clear, let alone a great majority. So those times when Mexico was effectively a one-party dominant state are gone, hopefully for good, because so much evil happened to the political culture of Mexico during the 7 decades of the Institutional Revolutionary Party's government. Yes, it provided a lot of continuity, that's true. And yes, the Mexican economy gradually grew so that Mexico became one of the so-called emerging democracies. And yes, Mexico in 1994 joined the North American Free Trade Agreement, which in 2020 became the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is a looser free trade zone than the original NAFTA agreement, and therefore allows more economic independence and protection of the domestic industries to its 3 member states, or member countries rather, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. But corruption was rife. So finally, I return to this article. However, Mexico suffers from severe rule of law deficits that limit full citizen enjoyment of political rights and civil liberties. Violence committed by organized criminals, especially, but by no means exclusively, the many drug gangs and cartels. Corruption among government officials, so for example, taking or accepting or offering of bribes. human rights abuses by both state and non-state actors, not only against the country's indigenous minorities, but also against, for example, homeless people, including street children, and various members of the country's lower social classes. And rampant impunity, so in other words, getting away with crimes, and the police officers often being either unable or too scared for fear of being assassinated or dying in shootouts um, to effectively crack down on crime or crimes, organized crime, or even sometimes being complicit in cooperation with those criminals. So scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, which is, of course, by no means unique to Mexico. This happens on a minor scale, even in the most advanced Western democracies, although only on a minor scale. Are among the most visible of Mexico's main governance challenges. For most of 2019, the left-wing president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, was popular. However, late in the year 2019, his popularity started to decline. For example, because of the record number of homicides. As far as I can remember, over 35,000 homicides were recorded in Mexico, the largest number for a long time. In the gubernatorial and local elections held in June 2019, the National Regeneration Movement maintained its high level of popularity. In March 2019, the Mexican government created a new gendarmerie, the National Guard, which officially began operating in June after drawing from Army and Navy police forces. Human rights advocates, however, criticized the agency, warning that its creation deepened the public security's takeover by the Mexican army. So the number of deaths attributed to organized crime remained at historic highs in 2019. In October 2019, the challenge to state authority was illustrated dramatically when soldiers and police were forced to release an accused drug kingpin in Sinaloa after a violent running battle with cartel members. So a very shameful example of the inefficiency of Mexican soldiers and police officers, not all of them, of course. Mexico bowed to strong US pressure of President Donald Trump, or by President Donald Trump, and agreed to detain, deter, and deport asylum seekers and migrants traveling through Mexico, especially through its largely open border with Guatemala in Central America, all the way up to its northern border with the United States in May and June 2019, after President Trump threatened to impose punitive tariffs. The Mexican federal government ordered nearly half of the new National Guard to enforce this policy, partially diverting it from its crime-fighting mandate. Apparently, the 2018 Mexican presidential and congressional elections were free and fair. A constitutional amendment, which was not fully ratified as of the end of 2019, allowed or potentially allowed the Mexican citizens the opportunity to recall, or in other words, forced to resign or fire the president halfway through his or her term. Although the federal elections of Mexico held in July 2018 were mostly free and fair, the election campaign was marked by violence and threats against candidates for state and local offices. At least 145 people died in this election violence. Accusations of illegal campaign activities remained frequent at the state and municipal levels. Although the congressional elections were apparently mostly free and fair, there were still accusations of illegal campaign activities at the state level. and violations including vote buying, ballot stealing, and misuse of public funds were reported in 2018. Mexico's National Electoral Institute supervises elections and enforces political party laws, including strict regulations on campaign financing and the content of political advertising, although control is uneven in practice. While the 2018 Mexican elections were generally considered free and fair, the National Electoral Institute, or Instituto Nacional Electoral, and the Federal Electoral Tribunal struggled to comprehensively address problems including misuse of public funds, vote buying, and ballot stealing, and to ensure transparent campaign finance. After the elections, the ruling National Regeneration Movement took steps to cut the National Electoral Institute's budget and shorten the terms of its directors while writing Mexico's federal budget for 2020, prompting accusations that the López Obrador administration sought to lessen electoral oversight and give itself an advantage in future elections. President López Obrador has publicly praised the use of referendums known as citizen consultations. They are not supervised by the National Electoral Institute. As 2019 progressed, the Mexican Congress incorporated those consultations on infrastructure and social spending, which offered in 2018 and 2019 few protections against fraud and featured only a small proportion of Mexican voters participating, into a new constitutional reform package, including a mechanism to allow for the recall of the president. Opponents, however, criticized the measures, particularly the presidential recall, which they claimed was a way for President López Obrador to boost candidates of his party, the National Regeneration Movement, candidates for the 2021 midterm elections, or even rule beyond his own mandate. The amendments awaited state-level ratification at the end of 2019. Mexico's multi-party system features few official restrictions on political organization and activity. Although the 2018 elections were marked by a lopsided victory for the National Regeneration Movement, most notably in the presidential elections where it captured over 53% of the vote, opposition parties are competitive in some states and independent candidacies are becoming more common. President López Obrador's victory also reflected the political system's growing openness to pluralistic competition, so competition by many parties and movements, and ended fears on the left that powerful actors would block their electoral path to power. Victories in the gubernatorial elections in 2019 in Baja California and Puebla reinforced the National Regeneration Movement's gradually growing strength at the subnational level. The National Regeneration Movement officials now govern 6 states and Mexico City, so a total of 7 because Mexico City is currently treated as a federal state, and control 20 of the 32 state legislatures. Power has routinely changed hands at the national level since 2000, although the National Action Party was able to hold the presidency for 2 consecutive terms from 2000 to 2012. But then the Institutional Revolutionary Party, with its successful presidential candidate Enrique Peña Nieto, was able to capture the presidency for 6 years, and then the power shifted leftward, with the National Regeneration Movement capturing the presidency. In 2019, analysts, opponents of the National Regeneration Movement, and the National Electoral Institute sharply criticized the law passed by the Baja California legislature that retroactively extended its new governor's, Mr. Jaime Bonilla's, term to 5 years from the 2-term limit he won in June 2019. The law was swiftly challenged, with the Federal Electoral Tribunal unanimously finding it unconstitutional. in December 2019. Although Mexico's criminal groups are increasingly fragmented, this is not a fact that one would consider possible given the rather violent, the anti-Mexican rhetoric of President Donald Trump, by the way, exert powerful influence on Mexico's politics through threats and violence against candidates, election officials, even elected and appointed officials and campaign workers. Between the autumn of 2017 and the federal election day in July 2018, at least 145 politicians were murdered. While tens of politicians probably withdrew their candidacies in 2018 due to fears of violence. Separately, in states and municipalities with lower levels of multi-party participation, locally dominant political actors often govern in a highly opaque manner, so only partly transparent manner that limits political activity and citizen participation. A large minority of Mexicans are of indigenous or native origin, and they are free to participate in politics. There are some provisions for the integration of traditional community customs in electing leaders, and parties serving indigenous communities often compete with states with large indigenous populations. However, a smaller percentage of the local, state, and federal legislators are of indigenous origin than are of the Mexican population as a whole. So in other words, it's difficult for these native origin politicians to attract enough votes to get elected. This despite the fact that Mexico has, especially at the federal and state levels, quite inclusive electoral systems, so parallel ones where a minimum of 2% in the Chamber of Deputies and a 3% of 3% in the Senate and in the state legislatures are needed to get at least a few seats. The 2018 election confirmed the success of gender requirements for candidacies because female representatives increased their share of seats in the Mexican Chamber of Deputies to 48% and in the Mexican Senate to 49%. So as already noted, organized crime and related violence have limited the effective governing authority of elected officials in some areas of Mexico. Members of organized crime groups have persisted in their attempts to infiltrate local governments to plunder municipal coffers and ensure their own impunity. The notorious and still unsolved mass disappearance of 43 students studying to become teachers in Iguala in 2014 was linked to a deeply corrupt local government collaborating with a drug gang, as well as a number of corrupt soldiers residing in a nearby barracks. In the most violent regions, the provision of public services has become more difficult, which is tragic given the huge gap between the rich and the poor in Mexico. As public sector employees face extortion and pressure to divert public funds. Despite all the efforts to stamp it out or at least to reduce it, official corruption remains a serious problem. The billions of dollars in illegal drug money that enter Mexico each year from the United States, so not just to the United States, but from the United States to Mexico, profoundly affect politics. No wonder various Latin American countries have been called derisively or cynically or resignedly narco-democracies. In other words, superficial democracies which in fact are run largely by these drug cartels' money and whose politicians have to basically kiss the hand that feeds them, the drug cartels, at least allegedly. As does rampant public contract fraud and other forms of siphoning off state funds. Attempts to prosecute officials for alleged involvement in corrupt or criminal activity have often failed due to the weakness of the cases brought by the state. The current presidential administration of Andres Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador has pursued corruption more actively than its predecessors. And Transparency International recorded a slight improvement in Mexicans' perceptions of corruption in 2019 over the previous year. Notably, the non-governmental agency or organization also found that 34% of study participants reported paying a bribe for public services in 2019, while 51% reported the same in 2017. Several prominent figures from the previous Peña Nieto administration were also indicted or arrested on graft or corruption charges during 2019. In May 2019, an arrest warrant was issued for the former head of state oil company Pemex, Emilio Lozoya, along with his mother, wife, and sister. While Lozoya remained free at the end of 2019, his mother, Gilda, was arrested in Germany, and the mother and agreed to return to Mexico to mount legal defense in November. In addition, former Urban Development Minister Rosario Robles was arrested on corruption charges in August. She was suspected of wrongdoing throughout her tenure in the Peña Nieto administration. However, as 2019 progressed, the former president himself was accused of accepting bribes, and those charges are still following him in late 2020, notably in proceedings taking place in the United States. In December, Genaro Garcia Luna, a feared public security secretary under former President Felipe Calderón, was charged with trafficking cocaine in the United States. He had been often accused of collaborating with the Sinaloa cartel during his tenure. However, critics have charged the current federal government of Mexico with selective prosecution, pointing to the administration's absolution of Federal Electricity Commission chairman and veteran politician Manuel Bartlett, following allegations of questionable asset accumulation. Despite some limitations, several freedom of information laws passed since 2002 in Mexico have successfully strengthened transparency at the federal level, though enforcement is uneven across the federal states. However, in October 2019, transparency advocates succeeded in obtaining a list of beneficiaries of tax amenities or amnesties between 2007 and 2015. The status of many beneficiaries and the large amounts of forgiven prompted allegations of politicized tax practices by the previous administrations. Mexico's security environment for journalists remains highly challenging. The Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ, recorded the deaths of 5 journalists in Mexico in 2019, representing over half of all murders recorded by the CPJ worldwide in 2019. In 2012, pressure from journalists and non-governmental organizations prompted former President Felipe Calderón, whose term ended in December of that year, to create a federal protection mechanism for human rights defenders and journalists within the Federal Interior Secretariat. Hundreds of activists and journalists have been successfully protected by this scheme. However, journalists have recently found themselves left out of the underfunded mechanism. News coverage in many media outlets is affected by dependence on the government for advertising and subsidies. Mexico has been at the forefront of citizen-led efforts to ensure internet access. However, gangs have targeted bloggers and online journalists who report on organized crime, issuing threats and periodically murdering online writers. Religious freedom is protected by the Constitution and generally is respected in practice, although the Roman Catholic Church is by far the dominant denomination. According to the English language Wikipedia, In 2010, over 82% of Mexicans were Roman Catholics, over 6% were Protestants, over 1% were other Christians, over 4% declared no religion, almost 2% followed other religions, while over 2% did not state their religious preference or affiliation. Religious minorities, especially indigenous evangelical communities in Chiapas, do face occasional persecution by local authorities. The Mexican federal government does not restrict academic freedom, although university students and some academics are occasionally threatened for their political activism. While there are no formal impediments to free and open discussion, fear of criminal monitoring restricts citizens' willingness to converse publicly about crime in some areas of Mexico. Constitutional guarantees regarding free assembly and association are largely upheld in Mexico, and protests are frequent. However, political and civic expression is restricted in some regions, and in recent years have resulted in violence against protesters, which at times has been deadly. Although highly active non-governmental organizations sometimes face violent resistance, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights counted 13 activist deaths by October 2019. Especially vulnerable have been environmental activists and representatives of indigenous groups contesting large-scale infrastructure projects. In February 2019, Mr. Samir Flores, an opponent of thermal, electric, and pipeline construction in Morelos, was murdered. Enraged activists demonstrated in Mexico City. The Federal Protection Mechanism for Human Rights Defenders and Journalists has provided physical security for activists since its inception in 2012, protecting hundreds of individuals since its launch. However, human rights groups consider it sluggish and subject to government neglect. The protection scheme has also run low on funds. It almost exhausted its budget in 2017 and 2018. It emerged in 2017 that a number of civil society activists had been the victims of attempts to spy on their electronic communications, presumably by government agencies. The current Mexican president, López Obrador, tends to dismiss criticism and insult perceived opponents, and that has generated rising tension between the president and the non-governmental organizations. Trade union membership in Mexico has diminished significantly in the recent decades. In 2019, a major labor reform took effect, bringing hope to an end to the rampant use of informal, non-transparent negotiations between employers and politically connected union leaders, resulting in protection contracts never seen by workers. Mexico's judicial system is plagued by delays, unpredictability, and corruption, leading to impunity. In other words, many criminals getting away with their crimes. In 2008, the Mexican federal constitution was amended, replacing the civil inquisitorial trial system with an oral adversarial one. Although implementation has slowly proceeded and some elements of the due process have improved, human rights groups have raised concerns about ongoing deficiencies, including questions about judicial impartiality and training. Technically, the new system was fully implemented by 2016. However, not enough lawyers, jurors, and judges have been trained adequately, and not enough lawyers, jurors, and judges have committed themselves to the reformed system. And therefore, there have been poor prosecutorial results. While the Mexican Supreme Court is generally regarded as independent, several appointments of justices in 2019 viewed as close to the current Mexican federal government raised concerns about diminished autonomy. One appointment was to replace Justice Eduardo Medina Mora, who resigned in October while under investigation for corruption. Lower courts and law enforcement in general are undermined by widespread bribery and suffer from limited capacity. According to a federal government survey released in September 2019, the vast majority of crimes committed in 2018 went unreported, in large part because the underpaid police were viewed as either inept or in league with criminals. And even when investigations are conducted, only a handful of crimes end in convictions. Mexicans are subject to the threat of violence at the hands of several actors, including individual criminals, drug cartels that operate with impunity, and police officers who are often susceptible to bribery. Especially common in Mexico are enforced disappearances, which remain tremendous challenges for the Mexican government, despite efforts to address the missing persons backlog in recent years. In addition, Mexicans in police custody are at risk of torture by the authorities and must also navigate a prison system where due process and physical safety are in short supply. Human rights advocates have consistently expressed concern about a lack of accountability for human rights abuses committed by members of the army, including torture, forced disappearances, and extrajudicial executions. As in previous years, the Mexican federal government's primary response to insecurity was the deployment of militarized forces to hotspots. Nevertheless, the number of deaths attributed to organized crime remained at historic highs in 2019, though the rate of acceleration slowed. Especially common was violence in Colima, Baja California, Chihuahua, Morelos, Guanajuato, and Michoacan. An effort to capture drug kingpin Ovidio Guzman, a son of cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, in the Sinaloa state capital of Culiacan, caused particular controversy in October 2019. After a National Guard patrol captured Mr. Guzman, they were surrounded by heavily armed cartel members who overpowered the patrol and forced them to surrender Mr. Guzman. In the process, at least 13 people were killed and 49 prisoners escaped, generating widespread anguish over the government's failure to keep Culiacan secure. The killing in November 2019 of 9 members of the Le Baron family, who live in a Mormon community in Sonora State, garnered attention in the United States and Mexico. The year closed with another violent running battle, this time in the northern town of Villa Union in late November 2019. Cartel members arrived in armored trucks and attacked the town hall, prompting an army counterattack. Mexican prisons remain unsafe, with inmates commonly engaging in criminal activity while incarcerated. Several alternative approaches to the violence epidemic, including amnesty for low-level offenders, an end to the strategy of targeting kingpins, and drug law reform remained under discussion by the end of 2019. While officially the Mexican laws ban discrimination based on ethnic origin, gender, age, religion, and sexual orientation, in practice, Mexico's large indigenous population has been subject to social and economic discrimination, and at least 70% of Mexicans with indigenous origins live in poverty. While Mexican law strongly protects the sexual minorities, those laws are not uniformly enforced. Transgender women in particular face discrimination and violence. Migrants from Central America, many of whom moved through Mexico to reach the US border, have long faced persecution and criminal predation. While the Lopez Obrador administration initially sought to protect migrants, it reversed course when the United States threatened to seal its border with Mexico and institute punitive tariffs in the spring of 2019. In response to the US Trump administration's threats, Mexico deployed its National Guard to arrest the northern flow of migrants, established immigration checkpoints along major roads, and raided migrant shelters in Mexico. The government also cooperated with the implementation of migrant protection protocols, a US policy forcing asylum seekers to remain in Mexico until their cases are processed. As a result, a maximum of 56,000 people have been forced to wait in border cities like Ciudad Juarez and Nuevo Laredo for their hearings, finding themselves at risk of kidnapping and extortion in the interim. Citizens of Mexico are generally free to change their place of residence, employment, or education. However, criminals in practice have impeded freedom of movement by blocking major roads in several states in recent years, and ordinary citizens avoid roads in many rural areas after dark. Property rights in Mexico are protected by a modern legal framework. However, the judicial system's weakness, frequent solicitation of bribes by bureaucrats and officials, and the high incidence of criminal extortion harm security of property for many individuals and businesses. Large-scale development projects have been accompanied by corruption and human rights-related controversy in recent years, exemplified in 2019 by disputes over high-priority López Obrador initiatives to develop a new airport at a military base north of Mexico City and a train line or railway line that would primarily serve tourists in the Yucatan Peninsula. Sexual abuse and domestic violence against women are common in Mexico, and perpetrators are unfortunately, perpetrators are rarely punished. In 2007, the Mexican Congress passed a law designed to protect women from such crimes. However, it is only partly implemented until now, particularly at the state level. And the killers of hundreds of women each year escape punishment. The current administration of President López Obrador was criticized by women's rights activists in 2019 when it cut funding for women's shelters. Many states reacted to Mexico City's liberalization of abortion laws in 2007, in other words, allowing them also for non-medical reasons, by strengthening their own criminal bans on the procedure. And since a great majority of the Mexicans belong to the Roman Catholic Church, at least nominally, and the Roman Catholic Church still officially does not, at least its conservative community, still officially do not accept abortion except in medical emergencies. However, in September 2019, Oaxaca became the second state to decriminalize first trimester abortion, so during the first 3 months of pregnancy. President López Obrador, since he's a left-winger, one would imagine him to be basically in favor of abortion rights. Amnesty bill, which was sent to Congress that same month, would cover women who sought abortions along with the doctors who performed them. In 2015, the Mexican Supreme Court ruling overrode state laws defining the purpose of marriage as procreation. By 2019, Mexico City and 18 other states had legalized same-sex marriage. Also, in 2019, judicial review expanded the sexual minorities' rights. In May 2019, the Mexican Supreme Court also ruled that a same-sex couple should be allowed to register their child in the Aguascalientes state. In July 2019, a federal judge in the Querétaro state ruled that transgender residents had the right to change their names and gender identities with the state's civil registry, making Querétaro the 8th Mexican state to legally recognize these rights. Economic opportunity is limited in Mexico, which maintains a high rate of economic inequality. Migrant agricultural workers face brutally exploitative conditions in several northern states. Mexico is tragically a major source, transit, and destination country for trafficking in persons, including women and children, many of whom are subject to forced labor and sexual exploitation. Okay, this is the end of my lengthy video. Hopefully this has been informative to all of you. Stay tuned, stay healthy, and God bless and protect all of you.